Perfect. All right. So, hello everybody. You are at the Youth Peer Advocate Technical Assistance Call. We're doing a panel today on neurodivergence in youth serving systems. My name is Jay Culkin. I'm the youth coordinator, youth training coordinator here at Families Together in New York State. So we can go to the next slide. This is my brief introduction, right? My pronouns are he, him. I'm a youth peer advocate with lived experience as a youth in the mental health system, and I've been a youth peer advocate in a community setting, residential setting, and a clinical setting. I'm an autistic person, and I experience what used to be called Asperger's syndrome, but that is now under the umbrella term of autism spectrum disorder. They no longer use Asperger's as much. And we can go to the next slide. We have three panelists here today. So our first panelist is Echo Urban. Echo is a youth peer advocate using she, her, they pronouns. Echo comes to us from Northern Rivers Family Services. Echo describes themselves as a professional lover of forests, intermediate at being a human being. That's cute. I love it. And they also call themselves a voracious. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yeah.
Voracious. Voracious lover of all forms of literature about cats, boba tea. I love that. Donnie Darko, and trying to leave the world softer than I found it. That is a very cute intro. Thank you. And then the next panelist. We have Mark Anthony Mendez. Mark Anthony is coming to us from SCO Family of Services. Mark has a associate's degree in human services mental health from LaGuardia Community College. As a teenager, Mark was a council member for the Department of Education in the Committee of Special Education, representing students with disabilities in all five boroughs of New York City. He has spoken at places such as the Scholastic Book Fair, Hilton Hotel, Parents for Inclusive Education, YAI, the Arise Coalition, and local New York City public schools, and even the United Nations. That was a cool one to read when I was reading through this. And Mark writes poetry and is working on an autobiography right now. And finally, we have Jay Bowen. Jay is a New York certified peer specialist who is currently within that youth range of 18 to 30, uses they, them pronouns, and is based on unceded Lenape. I'm pretty sure that's how it's pronounced, right? Lenape. Uh, Lenape land colonially known as New York City. Um, Jay works as a peer in a crisis respite center based in Lower Manhattan, collaborating with individuals on their healing journeys and holding space for their stories and their autonomy, which is also a really great intro. I love it. We can go to the next slide. Okay. So I'm going to ask y'all to put some stuff in the chat, your introduction, so we can just learn a little bit more about you. You can put your name, your pronouns, the role that you have at your agency or where you work, the county that you work in, or even just like the general kind of region, and share one thing that you are passionate about as our little icebreaker. And panelists, you're welcome to put it in the chat as well. Um, So for me, like I grew up on Long Island and I've lived on Long Island the majority of my life. So, the county I'd work in, I might have said Suffolk or Nassau County, or I could just say Long Island. So however you want to describe that. I love that. I'm gonna go through what people are saying that they're passionate about. Mark says poetry. Yes. I also love poetry. Um,
Lo and behold, I actually just completed a poem last night. A
awesome.
poem about mirrors.
Mirrors?
Mirrors.
Awesome. I'm such a poetry geek. If anybody loves poetry, and they're on Long Island, Walt Whitman Birthplace Association is a good place to go.
Would you like to type up in the chat?
Yeah, yeah, I'll message that to you, yes. Um, or let me put Walt Whitman Birthplace Association. And that's in Suffolk County. Oh, oops. Okay. I'm gonna go back to reading that. I see. Okay, Echo says weird movies that make your brain melt. Can you give us an example? Do you have an example?
Donnie Darko is one of my favorite with the weird Ronnie, but also like Mr. Nobody or like Inception, things that make you like question everything. Like if they don't send you into an existential crisis, I don't want to watch it. I mean, I would.
I like that. It's true. Like the like when you're watching movies and you just kind of just a lot going on.
I think it I think it honestly ties into my neurodivergence because it's like pattern seeking of like I just love movies that, it can get my brain going.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm so glad you brought it up like that because that's what we are covering today.
Yeah.
Um, Veronica says inspiring others, good passion. Um, Diana says working with people with learning differences. Peyton says antique shopping and work. Antique shopping, that's a good one. Um, Echo also says poetry. Kat says plants. I know some people that are really passionate about plants. Poetry. Emma says animals and nature. Denise says cooking and gardening. Lena says painting, journaling, and poetry. Um, Shakira says things that make them laugh, and Steve Urkel. It's a great.
Sorry. It's funny.
Feel like I appreciate all the participation because now I'm spending so much time reading all these things. Um, Learning, okay. Angel says learning from others' experiences, being educated, new cultures, and ideas that offer new perspectives. Jennifer says passionate about advancing peer support and animals. All right. I am gonna move forward. Thank you all for participating in that icebreaker. Today's agenda, we it's a just the two things really, and then kind of like that Q&A at the end if we have some time. So first we're going to start with a little crash course. I'm just going to give you all some background information, and then we will move, excuse me, right into the panel. We'll have an opportunity to kind of share resources if anybody has any, if the panelists have any that they know offhand. I have a few that I'll let you know of some external resources. And then again, if there's time at the end, we'll do a quick Q&A from any of the panelists that, might be willing and able to answer the questions. We can move forward. You have a question, Mark?
I do. What does the cake represent in neurodiversity?
Honestly, I don't know. It was just very cute.
I mean, not like I see that it looks like a interesting symbol that they put on here.
I think it was just because of a celebration, like,
Oh,
you have cake at a celebration type thing, says celebrate. So I don't think it actually connects to neurodiversity itself. But thank you for the question.
of course.
All right, so we can go to the next slide. All right. So here are some common forms of neurodivergence. I think that when we think of neurodivergence, we think of autism spectrum disorder and ADHD for the most part. At least that's, in my experience, what I've heard, from other people saying. Also, if you just came into the chat, I see a couple of people just kind of came in just now. If you could put your, where you work and put in one thing that you're passionate about so people can get to know you. So going back to this, so sensory processing, social and communication disorders are also part of neurodivergence. A little known part of that neurodivergence umbrella that's widely accepted in that umbrella would be dyslexia, dyscalculia, and other types of similar disorders like that, and then Tourette's. So I have a little bit of background information on autism spectrum disorder. So that can actually include things like what was previously known as Asperger's syndrome, and it's a neurological developmental disorder that affects how people interact with each other. Right, so it's communication, learning, and how they behave. Although autism can be diagnosed at any age, it's described as a developmental disorder. That's because symptoms generally appear within the first 2 years of life. So it's that, developmental type of situation. ADHD, it usually comes in three different types. So that's the inattentive type, the hyperactivity type, or the impulsivity type. Those are those like general clusters of symptoms, and people with ADHD can have more than one. They can have a combined presentation. It doesn't necessarily have to be one or the other. So inattention can be that difficulty paying attention, keeping on task, staying organized. The hyperactivity would be like moving around, feeling restless, talking excessively, and that impulsivity is like interrupting, intruding on others, or having trouble waiting their turn to speak or do something. Um, a little bit about dyslexia and dyscalculia. Dyslexia is a difficulty in learning to decode and reading aloud and spelling. So the DSM-5 classifies dyslexia as one form of neurodevelopmental disorder, sorry. And dyscalculia includes difficulty learning to decode, but it's mathematical and arithmetic types of information. And finally, a little bit about Tourette's. Um, it's a neurobehavioral disorder that manifests particularly with motor tics, and vocal tics, and is associated with what they call behavioral abnormalities. So tics are these like sudden, very quick, intermittent, and usually involuntary, sometimes can be semi-voluntary or somewhat voluntary tics. And motor tics can because of course vocal tics, that's like the, saying things. It's kind of like the stereotypical, as we know, Tourette's, like saying something very quickly out loud. But motor tics can be like blinking, nose twitching, head jerking, and can even be something more complex, like throwing something, hitting something, and even what they call phonic tics, which is like, sniffling, throat clearing, blowing out air, coughing, and things like that. Um, all right. So we can move on to the next. Yep. So, terms to remember. A few of them were pulled from Welcome to the Autistic Community, which is a manual from Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, ASAN, as well as a glossary of terms on the CHAD website, which is like an ADHD resource website. So we can go forward. So this is the term is augmentative and alternative communication. It's also known as AAC. What it really is, it's a large term that really just stands for something other than talking to communicate. So you can see in the little graphics here, like those, I guess they call them like peck boards. They have the pictures on them. That communicate something when somebody can't communicate verbally. Sometimes, people have an iPad or some types of tablet to kind of press whatever word they want to say, and even like sign language, can be some individuals who are nonverbal or only partially verbal will sometimes use sign language as an easier way to communicate. And it's even worth mentioning that sometimes really just writing can be more comfortable for people that are neurodivergent. It doesn't necessarily have to be just clicking buttons or holding up cards, but really just avoiding that verbal conversation in general can sometimes just be more comfortable. So we can go to the next slide for the next term. Attentional bias preferring to pay attention to certain objects, thoughts, and activities that one finds interesting. You might have heard like the term special interest or restricted interest. That this is kind of a term that is that encapsulates those ideas. So for example, somebody might only listen to one band, and that's the only band or the only artist that they listen to. Maybe sometimes here and there they'll listen to something else, but that's really like that's my one thing, and I find it very difficult to branch out type thing. So we can go to the next slide. Echolalia. So that's repeating words you've heard before, often a phrase from a TV show or something that's said by a loved one. And echolalia sometimes is not, you know, uh, I think sometimes people think of echolalia as something that like only people that are nonverbal do. Or people that are semi-verbal, they'll only use echolalia. Echolalia can be used by, even neurodivergent people that are verbal, fully able to use verbal communication. And also, I mean, I would argue that echolalia, anybody can do it. Sometimes you love something so much, that you're repeating the thing there's a lot of things within the neurodivergent community, all these terms that I'm giving you that like anybody can have. You don't necessarily need to be neurodivergent, but being neurodivergent makes it more pervasive. Like it's something that kind of affects your day-to-day life, or it's something that you kind of do very, very often to combat the symptoms that you may have from your neurodiversity. We can go to the next slide.
I just want to uplift the question in the chat from Lena, who says, has attentional bias also been referred to as fixation?
So, yeah, some people have called it hyperfixation. Yeah, like really fixate or, really fixating on one particular type of interest. Thank you for that question. Yeah, attentional bias is like that technical kind of term that encapsulates those things, but I did not think of hyperfixation, so thank you for pointing that out. Executive functioning. So that's a group of skills that can help people stay on track, such as following a plan. Right, so you might have heard people say like having executive dysfunction. That might be okay. I am just waking up, and I know I have to do something, but I'm so overwhelmed by all the steps that need to come before I do the thing, right? Like I need to brush my teeth, but oh, I have to like open up like I have to go out and buy new toothpaste. I have to open up the new toothpaste, all these different steps beforehand that makes it kind of difficult to really focus on. This is a task that I have to do. So that's just kind of one example of that executive functioning. So neurodivergent people usually have a difficulty with that, different parts of their executive functioning. We can go to the next one. So a meltdown. So when a neurodivergent person feels too much stress from over or under stimulation, leading to a lack of control over their feelings. So screaming, crying, running away, etc. So just like a lot of times it's like a sensory overload type thing, or being like interrupted a lot, or not being able to do the things that provide like the relief and comfort can cause a meltdown. So that's really it's sort of like there has to be some kind of outlet, and sometimes that meltdown is that unavoidable. Things have been building up, and it's really difficult now to, uh, sort of contain it, control it. Um, and over time, if neurodivergent people are learning skills to manage that, becomes a lot easier to avoid those meltdowns or cope with those mental meltdowns, or whatever the case may be. Um, Finding those, comfort objects and things. We can go to the next slide. So similar to a meltdown, right? When a neurodivergent person gets overwhelmed by stress, that stops them from being able to do anything, or at least diminishes their capacity. So their ability to talk or move may change. So it's sort of like the opposite of that meltdown, right? Like instead of kind of like having this big outburst, it's more like the stress has become so much that you just get weighed down. and then it just becomes very difficult. Like my brain is spinning with all these different things going on and such, and like it just my brain has all this attention to this one thing. So, I can't pay attention to all the things that I got, all the other things I got to do. So next slide. Sensory processing, how you think about and understand your senses. So really just, for example, if anybody has ever heard of like auditory processing disorder, where your brain kind of needs a little bit of extra time to gather the information from whatever you just heard. You may have heard the words, but really like taking the time to comprehend all the words together, string them together into a thought. That's like a diminished or lower sort of sensory processing ability. And you can have sensory processing issues without, being specifically autistic or having ADHD. Um, that some people have what's called sensory processing disorder, and that's like a thing by itself. All right, so we can move forward. Stimming. Um, so moving in the same way over and over again, everyone stims. I kind of mentioned earlier that there's some things that neurodivergent people do that everybody does, but it's just how much you do it. So everyone stims, but for neurodivergent people, it's much more prominent and sometimes interferes with parts of their day. I see Denise said OCD has a lot of similarities. It is actually, it's a neurodivergence that I failed to list on there, and I'd kind of put a very short list. But OCD has been considered a neurodivergence in a lot of circles. So thank you, Denise, for pointing that out. We can continue the next slide. Okay, before we move on to this next brief sort of informative part of things, does anybody have any questions that they'd like to put in the chat real quick about the terms that we've gone over? Or anybody want to unmute or ask any questions? Okay. And you can always put things in the chat as well. And we'll get to them. All right, so the next part of this, there's just three little concepts that I'm going to go over real quick. They're just things to consider. You'll see like a this or that kind of, there's not really one clear thing or answer. It's just things to consider when you're working with neurodivergent individuals. So the concept of identity first language versus person first language. So identity first language would be things like autistic person or a dyslexic person. Whereas person first language is things like person with autism or person with dyslexia. So some people prefer different types of language depending on personal preference, right? Like, so I'm an individual that would prefer to be called an autistic person. I feel like that's a pretty integral part of who I am. It's not the only thing that I am, but it's I want it to be known, this is a part of my identity, even though it's, there's a much bigger identity whole that I have. So that's like a personal preference of mine, but there are some people that are like, I don't want that to define me. I don't, I'd rather just be called a person with autism. And either are valid, whatever people prefer to be. I mean, you take the reins on your own, what affects you and what is part of your identity. So, but these are just things to consider when, working with neurodivergent individuals, kind of figuring out what is that preference for that person. So we can go to the next slide. So the second thing that I'm going to bring up, and again, this is another concept where it's like, that it is up to the individual what they kind of want to use. But this high functioning versus low functioning labels, and instead using the terms greater or fewer support needs. This is something I'm particularly passionate about. So many people within the neurodivergent community are moving away from the terms high functioning or low functioning because it describes how it impacts the people around them and not what the neurodivergent person themselves is actually experiencing within themselves. So support needs is used more commonly now with like self-advocacy spaces to describe what neurodivergent people need to live happy and healthy lives on their own terms. So if we're talking about somebody who, you know, is able to hold a job and is able to pay their own bills and do their taxes and, has a lot of, independent living skills, but is also constantly burned out, stressed out, goes home, and literally can't do anything for themselves. They may be able to function in society, but internally things are really like aching, hurting, whatever. Like they might have greater support needs. They might need more internally than they're able to present. Or vice versa. People might underestimate somebody who's nonverbal, but they don't really have a lot of support needs. They just need that like AAC device, like the tablet, like we were speaking about earlier. And that's it. They're able to like function, so to speak, whatever. So that is, something to just keep in mind. And like I said, this is an instance in which if a neurodivergent person themselves is saying, I just call myself high functioning. I don't really care about language. I'll call myself high functioning. Then you go with what the person wants, the individual. But like I would say that generally, when you speak like, see things like autistic self-advocacy network, or the autistic, what is it? Autistic and I don't remember the AANE. It's a neurodiversity learning and support website that I could always give a link to. But they have a lot of really great webinars. So like agencies like that will typically use support needs rather than functioning labels. We can go to the next slide. And then there's autonomy versus support. So this is the last part that I will go into here when it comes to this or that. So speaking of the functioning labels, using the current high functioning and low functioning terms that people use, that model, there's often this dilemma that shows up for neurodivergent people that of autonomy and support, you have to choose one and sacrifice the other, right? So as we were talking about people, that are able to function in society, they're able to like hold a job, do their taxes, date, get married and do all these like sort of milestones that people, designate as these typical milestones, but they are, in order to have that autonomy, be able to kind of do whatever they want, they're sacrificing support. One really interesting thing to consider is that, there's a lot of services that we talk about when it comes to advocacy, the SIFTIS services, the HCBS services, and all these different services. Youth peer advocacy being one of those SIFTIS services. Those are Medicaid specific, and I'm kind of sharing in my own, experience, that as the person who works full time, I don't have access to Medicaid at this point. I don't qualify for the particular services for a waiver and stuff like that, but that's because of, the work that I have put in, right, to get to that point, that I am able to have a lot of autonomy. But then what do? I sacrifice all of these, types of services. And of course, thankfully as a self-advocate, I've been able to find a lot of things. But for a lot of people, they aren't able to find those things very easily. And they don't have the support for it. And then, you have people that are able to, qualify for a lot of these different support services. They're able to get OPWDD waivers and things like that. But if they want to keep their Social Security, their disability benefits, you have to give up a lot of autonomy. You can't worry about all these, big milestones that you were looking forward to because you might lose out on your Social Security. You can't get married because you might lose out on your Social Security, right? Like these are things that people have to consider. What do I prefer? Do I want the autonomy or do I want the support, right? And that is a very hard choice for people to make. So when it comes to working with neurodivergent youth, this is another concern that you might want to consider when you're having these conversations. This could be something that's on their mind. So we can go to the next slide. All right. now we're going to get into the panel part. If there are any questions, any conversation that we want to go over those this or that things before we start, of course, put it in the chat. I'm actually going to go through the chat real quick before we start the panel, just to see. Yeah, I see Diana said great slide presentations helps us better understand this diagnosis. And this is being recorded. It will be on the YouTube channel for Families Together. So you can always review this, show this to people, excuse me, who might benefit from watching it. I see never always ask, never assume. Very true. I'm sure everybody knows the saying with assume, and then this distinction is personally helpful. Thank you. And then Lena said, I feel heard, seen, and validated when discussing this topic. Thank you. I'm really glad I was able to provide that for people. It's an important topic. Thank you, Jennifer. And Angel says, I didn't know that those things are all they have to go through. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Thanks for bringing that up too, that, it's something that people don't always think about, when they're working with neurodivergent youth and all those kind of extra layers. When we think of these systems, these child serving systems or youth serving systems that, as youth care advocates, we work within, we don't always think about those comorbidities type of things, right? So, I appreciate that this has been a good learning experience for a lot of people, and hopefully the panel will make it even better and even more awesome. So, I'm going to give the panelists an opportunity. I know we had those intro slides, but I want to give y'all an opportunity to introduce yourselves as well, and talk about, what's important to you before we get started. I will ask Mark if you want to say anything about yourself. I hope you don't mind starting us off here, kicking us off.
Of course. Thank you.
But what would you like to share as an experience with as a person who experiences neurodivergence?
So I would like to say first, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for attending this webinar. I am Mark Anthony Mendez, and I begin with my story by sharing that I was first diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder at 18 months old. I received early intervention services at that age because of my cognitive, behavioral, and speech delays. And when I began kindergarten, I was given the opportunity to be part in a District 75 inclusion classroom where I was educated alongside students with disabilities and or learning differences. And this included typical students without disabilities. Unfortunately, though, the bullying began all throughout elementary, middle school, and even into my sophomore year of high school. I share this important information because what stemmed from the bullying was that I was later diagnosed with depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress. It is advised to look out for these signs and become more aware of your own children, including family members who seem depressed and or anxious. What I have noticed while receiving special education services is that many times I saw the stigma of having a disability, including in the classrooms, and our parents were not treated or welcomed in many of the public schools or even after school programs. And many times we were put in the school basements, and many times we were put in the school basements and separated from the other students in order to get educated at the time. As my language began to emerge, I saw a shift in the way that I presented myself. I saw the importance of advocating for myself and for the sake of others. And in 2014, I was chosen to be a council member for the Committee on Special Education, representing all 5 boroughs in New York City. As a council member for special education, I spoke about alternative solutions to problems such as facing the special education classes and in local district schools, for example. I also found myself joining my mother, who was also advocating for justice and for people with disabilities to be accepted and given the same rights as my typical peers. My family was able to open our own support group in my home and help other parents prepare for the IEP and impartial meeting with their own children. And thus, this led to a fiery crusade in which my mother and I were able to speak at the United Nations, public schools, colleges, HBO themselves, and in different conferences to help families, clinicians, and service providers to be more aware that we were more than just people with autism. It was about educating them to accept us as we come in and to focus more on our abilities, not the disabilities. For another reason for our motivational speeches was to educate the public on the importance of opening up more inclusion classrooms and helping the state education public schools understand the long-term effects of bullying, which includes speaking about the many youths and disabilities who continue to commit suicide. Personally, I realized that the more I saw what was going on with the way neurodivergent people were being treated, the more I decided that I was going to help this population and pay my knowledge forward. For this led me to go to college and receive an associate's degree in human services and mental health. And fortunately, I have become a credentialed youth peer advocate, working and helping students on the autism spectrum. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. That was a really great, inspiring, blurb about yourself, and it was a great way to show, that neurodivergent people can be really successful, and you're a great representation. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
Um,
Thank you.
Jay, would you like to go next and introduce yourself?
Sure, I can do that. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Jay or Jason. I very much use them interchangeably, and there is another Jay here, so feel free to use Jason. I use they, them pronouns, and yes, I'm currently in New York City, working at a crisis respite center. So yeah, I wanted to share a bit about myself and I guess how my journey with neurodivergence like connects with my passion for building a more neuro-affirming or world safe for neurodivergent folks. So some more bits about me. I am a white person who identifies as or has background that is Jewish, German Jewish, and Puerto Rican. I also identify as disabled, living with my mental health, and also within the last year, newly epilepsy. I also identify as queer and non-binary, and a big important part of my journey and passion here as well is that I do a lot of community work around abolitionist organizing. I really believe that in developing a world where, as Angela Davis says, prisons are obsolete, I think we often see carceral interventions and responses to neurodivergence and other expressions of disability. And yeah, so definitely I can connect to some of what you had shared, Mark, about the experience of moving through so many diagnoses. I mean, throughout childhood, moving between being fussy and sensitive and shy, and then depressed, anxious, suicidal. I mean, in my experience throughout all that time, but having someone else, put that on. And so for me, when I think about neurodivergence, I really loved all the slides here and everything that we got to learn background. I think too, when I think about neurodivergence, I also think about experiences that include like hearing voices or other types of sensory phenomena. I think that can include personality disorders or what are called personality disorders or identity disorders. I don't think that there is a line, right? There's no line that someone crosses where they become really neurodivergent. I think that, what neurodivergence means to me and how I see it is folks who deviate from what looks like neuronormativity or these ideas about what it means to function correctly, what it means to work in the right way. And so I really believe, that doctors and such are not the arbitrators of, who can be, who is neurodivergent. We really get to shape how we name our things for ourselves. So I identify as someone living with ADHD, or really at the intersection of autism and ADHD. And the last thing I wanted to say was, we'll talk a bit more about the challenges, but I think a big part of it is that there are also little bits of really deep, like autistic joy, neurodivergent connection to things that can feel really deep and like electric amidst all the really real challenges we'll get into. So nice to meet you.
Thank you so much for all of that sharing. And you did bring up a great point. My list at the beginning was definitely not exhaustive, that there's a lot of, things under the umbrella of neurodivergence. So thank you. Echo, did you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, sure. Hey everybody, I'm Echo. I'm trying to, it's, when people ask you, like, tell me about yourself, it's always the hardest part. But I will say, for the longest time, like, neurodiversity is something that I used to think is, like, I used to have so much internalized ableism and self-hatred for being different. And I spent so many years of my life trying to mask, or what I perceived as masking, but now I think it's pretty self-evident. Like, I think to the people that love me and know me, it's like, oh yeah, that makes complete sense. Like, but at the time, um, due to both trauma and neurodivergence, I felt like masking and hiding myself was the safest option for me. And as I've got older and I saw representation, I thought it was really, really important that I also do the same thing, just because when I think of my younger self and when I think of the kids that I care for and advocate for, I think about how much, like, how alone I felt. And I didn't speak up for myself until nearly my 20s, and now I'm 26. And so seeing these kids, I want them to sorry, that's my dog, or not my dog, my cat. Speaking of ADHD, but I just really feel vehemently about the fact that I spent so many years trying to, like, make myself smaller and palatable. And now I am so proud to be different, and I take that in stride. And every day is different. Sometimes I won't lie. Like, there is that crawling urge of, like, oh, I wish I could be more normal. But I really do come to the conclusion nobody's normal and nobody's perfect. And these things are challenges I might have, or they could be strengths in other areas. And I think coming from a lens of, like, everybody is different, and advocating for myself and treating myself like the human I am, because everybody deserves acceptance. And I think the world can already be so cruel. So trying to make the world easier for people like me who already struggle with so much inside our heads. And Jay, I really thank you for bringing up the voices thing, because that also is something I experienced with my neurodivergence. And I think the world needs to be a safer place for people like us. And I think speaking up is the first big step in self-love and treating yourself like the person you needed when you were younger, and trying to transcend that to the rest of the world. So, ramble aside, yeah, I'm just really, really, like, passionate about
So beautiful. Yeah.
being the quirked up person I am. So, thank you.
Excellent.
My
Thank you.
hands are sweating. Oh my goodness.
That was so beautifully said. Thank you so much for sharing that
Thank
kind of,
you.
like, so the first question that I have today for this panel, what are some challenges that you face related to your neurodiversity? So Jay, would you be able to share first?
Yes, for sure. Um, I think, well, I think as like a grounds, definitely that piece of like the navigating moving diagnoses, I guess not having the language of neurodivergence for so long, or not having the language to understand the needs or the struggles that I was having. It just kind of seemed like, dang, this stuff is hard. Why is every day so hard? Is it hard like this for everybody? Yeah, I guess. I assume so. And then yeah, I definitely connect to some of the struggles that were named in the the slides. Um, Experiences of going nonverbal may look like shutdowns or meltdowns, um, or yeah, getting really overwhelmed and kind of not able to communicate and how that intersects with my ADHD is I will have like a billion thoughts that I want to say in my head, whether this is like when like navigating conflict, like in a relationship, or just like, even like, just sometimes things get stuck behind a wall, it feels like, even though they're spinning in there. The navigating difficulties around executive functioning is huge, whether that looks like just getting things started, or like trying to move between different tasks, especially like in unexpected change, can be really overwhelming. And yeah, I definitely also wanted to speak to the experience of suicidality that, I know Mark had also brought up. I think I think about it sometimes, but one of my earliest memories is an attempt at suicide when I was very young. I was probably about 8. And in reading and connecting with other neurodivergent folks, I've learned and seen that this experience is so common amongst folks navigating these challenges. Those feelings of not understanding where these difficulties are coming from, not being able to communicate or identify the needs that we're experiencing. I definitely, I guess this is kind of the wrapping. I can definitely relate to the experience of like going to school and doing the things. I meant, growing up for me, I was labeled with the label they call, gifted, and how that, showing up to school, doing the things, and then, melting down, being burnt out, overwhelmed at home, and how that, for me, when I got to college, and I started to navigate more experiences of suicidality, and the school threatened to put me on probation. That was a real awakening for me to like dive more into trying to understand myself and to kind of understand more about these challenges, and to be able to have more words for them like I do now than I did then. Yeah.
Noble and powerful. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Mark, do you want to go next for that question? The question was, what are some of the challenges you face related to your neurodiversity?
If you so wish.
Go ahead.
All right. The pressure of having to perform at your absolute best consistently. Even my own attempts to fit in with both friends and family, knowing that any given moment, depending on who I am with, I am forced to put up a facade to continuously fit in with a person and or group. And this includes holding a job as well. This also applies to gaining popularity rather than creating authentic friendships. Another challenge that many members of the autism spectrum community continuously face is that this condition is more internal rather than external, meaning that we appear neurotypical, yet when we are in any kind of moment, whether positive or negative, would override our emotions uncontrollably. Even our sensitivities to various stimuli, such as touching, lighting, noises, and meals, can feel overstimulating.
Thank you so much. That you touched right on that, what was it, the internal versus external, which is perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the next question that I have, some people in the neurodivergent community experience sensory issues. Can you explain what it's like to have sensory differences, Mark? I know you already kind of touched on that a little bit, but if you had any more to add?
I'll let people share their experiences first, but thank you.
Sure. Um, and did you, Jay or Echo, do you have anything to add? I know that might have been, we could always skip over it if it's,
Kind of like going back to like just before sensory issues, if that's okay.
yeah.
I just feel like the biggest challenge, I think, I don't remember who mentioned this earlier, but I think a lot of like the general population, not to put everybody into a category because it's never black or white. But I think the general population, people who are neurotypical, they mean well. Don't get me wrong. Nothing. I'm not shaming all of you if you're neurotypical. I'm sure you're lovely. But I think sometimes people, it's the same with like mental illness. People see the behaviors and not the underlying factors and like the things they could be struggling with. And I just remember when I was a kid growing up, like going into the special ed classrooms and feeling so much shame because it was like, oh my God, it's taking attention to me. Like I just, for some reason, catastrophized it almost. Like there's so much shame of seeking supports and helps and being different. But I really think that, you know, for all the challenges that face that, it also forces um, for neurodivergent people like us, or like our sense of justice, you know, that supersedes it. And even though it is challenging, and I won't deny that, especially when it comes to masking and all the behaviors that happen internally and both externally, I think our resilience and our ability to just have that sense of justice seeking is what can transform any difficulty to not necessarily like a superpower. Like I think we do have superpowers of our own sorts. But I do think that being able to like have the adversity and the strong sense of justice, it just um, it can make the challenge. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of a positive spin because there is a positive to it, not in a toxic positive way, but I will say for the challenges that we face as a community, I think our ability and our community together, we can all stand up, and I just think it's beautiful. So sorry if that was a ramble, but that's your case study of neurodivergence, I guess.
I appreciated it. Jay, is it okay if I jump in on this question a bit too?
Absolutely, yeah.
Um, I think at first when I saw this question, I was like, no, I don't like, I can't think of anything I would want to speak about there directly. And then the more I processed it, I like again was connecting more dots. I think with the sensory differences too, there's both you know, hypersensitivity where we're extra sensitive. That might be to like sounds, noises, touch. You know, some people that's taste or textures. But there's also like hyposensitivity or being less sensitive, and that's like something I relate to. When I think about the senses too, I think, you know, of course, we've got the five big ones like the, you know, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. But I also think of these ones we've got interoception, which is like how our body interprets internal signals, like, you know, feeling hungry or feeling tired. Like proprioception, which has to do with balance and like desiring stimulation. So for me, I was thinking about that because that shows up definitely having a hard time interpreting those signals, just like, yeah, not noticing when I am tired or hungry, sometimes not paying attention to smells or sounds until someone like draws attention to it or names it, because I'm somewhere, you know, there's some other stuff. And also in regards to like seeking sensory stimulation, I know that for me that has showed up in like navigating self-harm. You know, I think for me, like head banging was something I struggled with, wanting to bang my head onto surfaces. And yeah, I was going to talk about, I will talk later too, but navigating and finding harm reduction strategies for those was also key for me. So yeah, that.
Thank you. Thank you for your share. Mark, I know you wanted us to circle back to you?
Sure. So I can share an experience with you on how different members of the autism spectrum community have faced many sensory issues, myself included, when I would go to the beach or the pool and the sound of the crashing waves petrified me. Personally, the noise of the toilet water flushing terrified me. It was loud, fast, and the way the water would spin and swirl down the toilet was too much for me to process. Even brushing my teeth as a child was indeed very difficult because my mouth and teeth were so sensitive to the toothbrush in my mouth. I also remember the classic vintage game Operation, and the original cover showed doctors operating on patients who had open wounds. But in my mind, it looked like the doctors were killing the patients, and this terrified me for years on end. If you don't believe me, Google the game Operation and see for yourself.
Thank you. That definitely I would say relatable for me, relatable story with that. All right, and the next question that I have is what is some specific terminology to the neurodivergent community that you would like to explain more? So anything that I didn't cover at the beginning during this crash course, or anything you wanted to expand on with those terms? Jay, do you have any?
Yeah, the one, um, I think the one that came to mind, in terms of like expanding upon was executive functioning. Because for me, like getting a deeper dive into executive functioning, and again, like kind of having some language to identify the struggles, and the things that I could do more, was really important for me. I have a little graphic that I like pulled up, which I was going to email the link to myself so I can drop in the chat. But someone their name is Lived Experience Educator, and they have a wheel of like executive functioning tasks or skills. So they talk about maintaining focus on a task, responding and adjusting to changes, regulating thoughts, feelings, and responses, so like emotional regulation, switching and starting tasks, problem solving and self-reflection, remembering the steps that you do as you do a task, organizing and prioritizing goals, and then time and time management. And kind of really being able to break it down into those pieces kind of for me helped to be like, okay, I can see like I can see how all these pieces one can connect to be such a difficult piece of a puzzle of just taking action. So getting all that language to see all the steps was affirming, because it was like, yeah, so much does go through to just move forward and take a step. So I could be like, yes, it's okay. It makes sense to struggle. Look at all these pieces we're holding at once. So yeah, like learning about executive functioning was a really supportive one for me.
Great, thank you. Mark, did you have any that you wanted to add?
I do, actually. So, in my opinion, the word neurodivergent is a better word to use than saying this person is autistic. Also, instead of saying that person with a disability, maybe it's best to say that person with a learning difference. Another terminology specific to deep interests is that neurodivergent people experience differences in a way they process and attend to information in which they can be highly focused and knowledgeable about an area of deep or intense interest. For instance, people may say that person with ASD is obsessed with this or that, when in reality, we are not obsessed. We are passionate about the things we are creating. For instance, my passion was with the Thomas the Tank Engine franchise. Not realizing it, but learning to assemble the train tracks and calling my sister to play with me taught me about turn taking and social skills. My instructor, including my mother, used it as a reinforcer to get me to learn different tasks. So the question becomes, was I obsessed with trains? Absolutely. But was it a bad thing? Absolutely not. The word obsession sounds too harsh. Another example was the artist Van Gogh, who was portrayed in the films like a man with painting obsessions, when in fact, yes, he was a genius who struggled with a combination of mental health issues, including bipolar, borderline personality disorder, and even had some depressive episodes. But regardless, he became a famous and powerful artist. And lastly, words can be words can be hurtful, even being a typical human being, for instance. And I'm glad that finally we are no longer supposed to be calling people the R word, and people with ASD and many other neurodivergence and people with ASD and many other neurodivergents are bright. We may be different, but deep within, they are human beings like neurotypicals are.
Thank you. And thank you again for drawing me attention to passionate versus obsession. That's, that was part of why I did the passionate about the, with the icebreaker. Like, what are you passionate about? So thanks so much for bringing attention back to that.
Thank you for the question.
Sure. So the next question that I have is what are some of the things that you have found helpful or supportive when coping with the symptoms of your neurodivergence as a youth? So Mark, would it be all right if I start with you?
Of course. So the things that I found helpful or supportive when coping with my symptoms are going on nature walks, meditating or praying, calling a friend, reading self-help books or even comic books, writing my own poetry and even working on my novel, researching my favorite hobbies or interests, window shopping, treating myself to a nice breakfast, lunch, or even dinner, and even sometimes dessert, no matter how high the prices may be on Seamless. And drawing and writing, and I also enjoy experimenting with different wardrobe combinations. Also, picking up a new skill and learn to create my own hats. Like in my top of my closet, for example, I have like 12 to 15 hats up there. So I won't say it's an obsession, but rather it's a bit of a passion. That fashion is part of my passion.
Thank you. Jay, or actually, you know what? Why don't we go with Echo real quick? Did you have an answer to what are some of the things you found helpful or supportive?
Yeah, for one, representation, I find like I think that both the internet and, like TV, art, media, what have you, has been making a lot of strides in the past few years. But having that representation, because for me as a kid, not having an example of somebody, like, granted, everybody is different no matter what their diagnosis. People can be very different. They can, it's like the autism wheel. It's a wheel. It's not like a scale, and people can think that it's one binary way or another, but it's so many different ways. But I think just having simple representation of like, hey, you're not alone. There's other people going through this, and like normalizing it, because while the symptoms sometimes don't feel normal, and like I said, there's no such thing as normal in my book, and the people that seem the most normal, that's who you question. Anyways, that's a ramble for a whole other day. But I think having the representation and just telling yourself and surrounding yourself with community that, instead of making, because when I was younger, I was definitely either bullied, that was a huge thing, or I felt kind of like the pet of people, if that makes sense, like in the sense where they kind of kept you for comedic entertainment. But having like supportive people who will stand by you and advocate for you when you go nonverbal or you're too afraid to speak up for yourself. But like I said, just the biggest thing for me is having that representation, knowing that like I'm not the only person going through this, and there's, yeah, natural supports. Also, my cat is freaking great. And just like self-soothing opportunities, like a really hot shower, and um affirmations, just reminding myself, like, it's okay, this is my first time being human, and I don't have to have all the answers. And I know that my pattern seeking brain tends to like try to find the easy fixes and solutions, but more so than masking or anything like that, I think just reminding myself it's okay to be exactly who I am, because the right people, I genuinely mean it, will support you and see you for all you are, and want to offer those supports rather than shame you for having differences, because, you know, everybody is unique, and it's our differences that make the world a beautiful place. If everybody was the same and had low needs or no low support needs, then it'd be a very boring world. And I just really thank it to representation, and even things like TikTok, like people, I've noticed that older generations tend to think like, oh, TikTok, like, oh, like people are self-diagnosing. But I honestly think like, even if they might not like have an official diagnosis, doing that research and trying to find, if there's stuff that you relate to and finding communities, then there's no harm in that, as long as you're taking the, you're taking the opportunity to educate yourself from a place that doesn't come from bias, and really trying to learn yourself and seek answers. And just the biggest thing is representation. So long story short, I think, surrounding yourself and drilling that narrative into your head or other people's heads of like, there's people out there like you and you will find your community. And I don't know, when I was a kid, it was just so isolating, feeling so alone. And that's the last thing I want to make anybody feel. So yeah, thank you. Sorry for the ramble, but it
Oh,
comes with the
beautiful. Thank
territory.
you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Share is very important. There's a reason, we put together these panels to, hear what your voice, what you have to say. So, my
Thank you.
next, of course, my next question is, how have you found being neurodivergent has impacted your work as a youth peer advocate, if at all? Mark, are you able to take a crack at this first?
I mean, I would like to hear other different experiences. Like if you don't mind, I would like to be the person to go last. But like
But
I
for
do
this,
appreciate like the coming first part, but it's more important for me to hear other experiences to learn from their experiences as well. If you don't mind, thank you.
all right, so Echo, do you have
Yeah.
anything? Sure.
Sorry, y'all, just dealt with my ramble, but and when I say stuff to apologize, it's a thing I'm working on. I promise I do love myself. Um, but jokes aside, I think neurodivergent, it has helped me be able to seek patterns. Like I said earlier, I'm somebody where I don't know if y'all are familiar with the meme from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, where the character's like putting the web of everything together. But that's how my brain feels being neurodivergent. Like I can see a million tiny little details and things, and I can connect them perfectly like a web. And I think that really helps me, because I think sometimes clinicians on my team, all the respect for them, but they see the general and they try to see like what is symptomatic, what is treatable, what is something we can work on. But I think trying to find the little things in the cracks that can tell you more about the person, and it also helps them feel seen. Like for example, I was talking to a youth the other day, and he said, "Thank you for like hearing my old man stories. You're the only one who wants to." And it just saddens me, because it's like giving people that opportunity and taking every little detail into consideration, because you might be missing stuff. And there's a lot of hyper focus that I do too. So when I like to go into my detail seeking mode, I think being able to spend that much amount of time and just really put like both my heart into it, and also just my neurodiversity of like, these are my skills. And just seeking those patterns, like trying to find if there's any relations to things. But also I just think like being the underdog, as somebody who kind of slipped through the cracks in the system as a young one, I think trying to find the ones who are also not advocated for or spoken about as much, and really just taking people in for their totality, and details really help me. So, but not anything, and any absence of math. So, but that's just me.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
That's it.
This is a sort of similar question, and this is if you are a youth peer advocate, this is the question you want to listen to. If you've listened to nothing else, this is the one to pay attention to. Although I'm sure everybody's been paying attention anyway. But how do you think youth peer advocates can best support the youth when they work with when they work with people who are neurodivergent, right? So any kind of like tips and tricks that you have, things that like you feel like based on your lived experience that people should keep in mind. Um, do you have a preference for who goes first? I don't know. I know Mark, you just said you wanted to kind of absorb a bit, but
I'm okay with going first. I mean, if that's okay with everybody, like as long as I have everyone's active consent and I'm not holding y'all um, a hostage, I don't want y'all chomping at the enclosure here. But I think for me, patience is key. Like two people with the same diagnosis don't always like, they're going to be very different. And keeping that in mind and not trying to look in for like a binary system, because odds are, I think neurodivergent people historically have been medically like diminished. You know, they haven't really had, at least historically, they have not been like taken care of as and seen for all they are. So trying to hear every part of their story, like I said, with patience, and then also trying to like do the additional training to help support them. Like for example, there was just an autism training last week, and I found that really beneficial. And I know for myself, I really like somatic exercise. So trying to get the kid active and moving, especially because like trauma can be held in your body. And I think unfortunately, I hate to say this, but I think being neurodivergent is inevitably somewhat traumatizing experience on its own. So just being able to do the trauma work with them and incorporate like how neurodivergent has like traumatized them, because the world isn't meant, unfortunately, as much as I wish it was, it isn't shaped for people like us sometimes. And as much as I'm trying to change that, you know, it takes a community. And I think what really helps with me, for example, like you said earlier, hyperfixations. If I know my client has a lot of like hyperfixations, like let's say they're really into like, oh gosh, let's say they're really into SpongeBob, okay? I like to get like, for example, their coping skills, and I try to incorporate like, what is one coping skill that you think would go in line with SpongeBob? Like, what would he do for a coping skill? What do you think Patrick would do? And try to incorporate that as like integration kind of like, these are all, you know, you really like this TV show, so maybe try to model some of this healthy behavior or things that you find in media or art, and do it in a way that makes you feel inclusive and not restrictive.
Thank you. That was great. So, and I did like the attention to like the balance. You were kind of saying not like a binary, like kind of seeing things not so black and white. So thanks so much for
Yeah.
bringing that up.
I like seeing everything in rather than black or white. I suggest everybody try to see the world in iridescent or shiny colors in the rainbow, you know, because there's, I don't know, with 8 billion people, there's bound to be a huge spectrum of everything.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right. So Mark, did you want to answer that same question that, how can youth peer advocates best support the youth that they work with who are neurodivergent?
I do, and I also wanted to go back to question 6, if you may.
Okay, sure. So that was, how have you found being neurodivergent has impacted your work as youth peer advocate, if at all? Okay,
Yes,
so go ahead. Mhm.
thank you so much. The best support any youth peer advocate can give is by first reading about the person's history and their background. This includes accepting the client as they come, meeting them where they're at, and doing active listening so that as YPAs, we can better understand our clients, including working on the goals they need and also want. Because in this field, the youth being served does guide the services as well. I also reminded them that some days may not be good days, and when this happens, it's completely okay, it's perfectly fine, and it's perfectly natural. Challenges and obstacles are also opportunities to learn. When growing up, I felt that being neurodiverse made me feel different, and attempting to fit in was incredibly difficult. I also believed that autism spectrum disorder was a curse. But then I saw the beauty and the gifts of being neurodiverse and being employed in this field. This has allowed me to learn more about responsibilities and even bringing out more of my creative side. I began learning new skills, trying to figure out my passions, strengths, including teaching, mentoring, coaching, and role playing, and how bringing these new skills to the table will bring youth and hope to the families that I work with. I never thought how much of my life would be impacted by my diagnosis. And of course, we do have to work harder to succeed. But good things have come from all of this, like living independently. And I now see that it is hard work, but deeply gratifying. I will continue to share my success story and to give others hope so that they too can find the same resilience that I have found in my own life. Thank you.
Thank you. Um, did you also want to talk a little bit about how youth peer advocates can support?
Support themselves.
Supporting the youth that they work with.
Well, like I stated before, meeting them where they're at, using a lot of role playing, using your imagination as well, and definitely coming up with different solutions and option based. And when there's not good days, is to definitely listen to where they're at and, you know, um, doing nothing with them, in other words, just thinking and talking, because sometimes it's always better to listen than to just speak all the time. Like for myself, I usually like to have a conversation with my youth first, saying how's your day, how's school, talk about their passions a little bit, and whenever they so choose to, work on the goals with them. It's usually my methodology of how I work with the youth.
Thank you. In the interest of time, there's just one question left, and I'd like to just remind the panelists, we have about 10 minutes left. So the final question is, how can neurodivergent youth peer advocates care for themselves? I'm also going to say Jay is not a youth peer advocate. Jay is a New York Certified Peer Specialist, which is a potential option for those who want to stay with the peer world when they age out of the youth peer advocate credential. So Jay, I'm just hoping that when we get to you, that you'll speak a little bit, just on your experience as a peer specialist rather than a youth peer advocate. Would you like to go first, or do you have anything to mention?
Can I not go first so I can take another
It's okay.
second to think?
Yes, no worries, because I know you have a little bit more of a complicated question to answer in a way. Echo, would you be comfortable going first? Okay.
More than happy to, yeah. So I feel like there's a lot of components, not every day looks the same with providing myself the same that I try to give to everybody. But I think recognizing like self-care is also, I really like wheels, I'm not gonna lie. I really like those chart wheels. They're really helpful for me. And like how self-care can be spiritual. So sometimes I like to go to, I find myself interested in a lot of religions and a lot of different modes of spirituality. So sometimes that can be different, like going to a Buddhist monastery. Um, and sometimes it can be just as simple as like meditating. Like, I believe Mark or Jay said earlier, I'm sorry, my memory is not the best. But doing stuff like that, I think journaling is a huge thing. And having that supervision, being able to talk to my supervisor and having that like supportive work environment where I can feel safe to unmask and say like, hey, I am having really difficult like time hearing about this. I need to practice self-care. If something is too much for me, like revisiting it. Because I think, oh, just a second. I'm sorry. My cat is jumping on everything. Bukowski, come on. Okay. Sorry, guys. I think there's lots of self-care. Definitely top tier is prioritizing self-care because I think shutdown mode and burnout is so inevitable and doing the precautions. So if I feel like I know my warning signs and if I feel myself slipping or let's say like sleep is becoming more difficult and waking up in the morning, I think doing those proactive things of like, what are things I can put in my place preventatively so they don't happen? And just being realistic with myself and what I can tolerate versus my coworkers, because sometimes people who are neurotypical have like, I don't want to say higher threshold, but they can tolerate more than I can. And maybe it's not even tied to the neurodivergence, maybe something else within me, because everybody's complicated and has their own niches. But I just think, sorry guys, I get into rambles, but I really think self-care is of the utmost importance. And I think
Indeed.
reminding yourself that you're worth the care that you give everybody else, and you can't come, people always say like put on your life mask first, but I think that and just like recognizing that like you're not meant to be a machine. Yes, we live in a capitalist society that tells us that we're supposed to be like da 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 da, but at the end of the day, like you're not going to be able to help anyone else if you're coming from a place where you use all your expenses and then you get home and you're burnt out. It's like you also have to put the supports in place so then you can feel seen and you can advocate for them and you can advocate for yourself. And I think I spent so many years of my life driving myself into burnout, and I would be like, why the heck is this happening? But now the past year of just really making sure I have those supports in place. I have people I can contact if I feel overstimulated. I have like stimming options. I just really try to do the preventative measures because I know burnout is super real. And sometimes you gotta let yourself brain rot. I'm not gonna lie. Sometimes you just gotta scroll and watch like lots of cute seal videos on TikTok.
Absolutely. Uh, Mark, did you have anything you wanted to add real quick?
I absolutely would. Thank you for the honor. When I experience stress, I take deep breaths and also take a break with the client, as per mentioned before. I find this incredibly effective when there is much to do with the client. Depending on the severity of the situation, I would take a mental health day to regroup and to re-strategize so that I can use different coping mechanisms to help with my caseload and reevaluate what's important as far as the goals I need to meet with them. Sharing with your supervisor that you feel stressed and what suggestions they may have for you. So even though like your supervisor is your boss, may they be opening to listening to your stress when you feel burnout, and may you also feel open to the suggestions that they may have for you, because your supervisor also cares about you.
Yes, thank you so much. It's true. There's some really great supervisors out there for sure that are very supportive. So,
Definitely.
and
I'm really
Jay,
grateful
if
to
you want
have
to
such
just,
experienced supervisors.
what'd you say, Mark? Sorry.
Now that I am eternally grateful to have powerful supervisors that powerfully support.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. So, Jay, you got that last little piece?
Yes, and I will try and speak to that piece. Oh, I'm gonna drop my email in the chat quickly as well. Please do reach out if you want. Love to share resources and connect. But yeah, I definitely want to speak to that experience, I guess, as a certified peer specialist. I think in my experience, we're working with folks across such a wide variety of ages. Here at the Respite, we are now 18 plus. We were 21 plus until last year, actually. So I've had the chance to collaborate with some more queer trans youth, which has been special. But you know, we're seeing people across all ages. And for me, there's a real power in getting to work intergenerationally to connect our experiences across such diverse times and languages for these things. And there's also a lot of grief. There's a lot of grief to see people who have been trying, people who are on their journey, we are still fighting. There's a lot of grief to hold. And so for me, like finding ways to move that through. Someone had asked before about trying to like name strengths as well. I think part of like navigating the immense power and knowledge that our senses may have, especially as neurodivergent folks. I really do think of my body as a portal. I really do try and find work in grounding, doing whether it's shaking things out, sometimes it's jumping, sometimes it's yelling into a pillow, but really trying to find ways to move things like through my body. And finding your roots. Finding my roots has been one of the most essential things in caring for myself, finding my values, my intentions for showing up in doing this work and being with people every day, and rooting into that, and then trying to align those values with my actions each day. Recognizing that sometimes we make step backs, that we have to experiment and learn new things and not shame ourselves for what we figure out on the journey. And yeah, that's that.
Thank you.
Now that indeed it's about the journey, not the destination.
Yes,
Thank
yes,
you.
yes, yes.
Thank you for the reminder. Thank you for the reminder.
Well, thank you so much for all of the panelists. We are very short on time, so if y'all could just stick around for a few more minutes, just for a few of the announcements, and before we wrap up, so we can go to the next slide. And thank you so much to all of our panelists. You did Absolutely amazing. So here are some of the upcoming events that we have here at Families Together. And if anybody has any resources, obviously we don't have time to like shout them, but put them in the chat. Any external resources you have, websites, etc., please put them in the chat. So we can go to the next slide for the upcoming events. So the next TA call that will be run is going to be 11:30 a.m. on it says April 15th, but that's not correct. I believe it was May 15th. So it's a role clarity and principles of youth peer support refresher. So participants will be able to review and discuss role clarity and how to communicate their role responsibilities with others in their workplace. Participants will also review principles of youth peer support. So we can go to the next slide. So here are some of the upcoming events for our workforce and development department. So there's the youth peer meetings. That is actually Youth Power. My apologies, I misspoke. But Youth Power runs the youth peer meetings. You can use that QR code and or the link to register for those upcoming meetings. There are the monthly TA calls. That is what we're doing right now. So to register, you can use the QR code or the link at the bottom. And then finally, the Supervisor Experience Cafe. If you want to recommend it to your supervisors, any of the youth peer advocates here, it is for current supervisors only of, youth peer advocates. And that's just an affinity space for supervisors to, talk to each other, get best practices on how to provide good supervision for y'all. And then we can go to the next slide. This is just a brief overview of the youth peer. This is the name of it has changed. It says Youth Peer Services Advisory Committee. It is now renamed to Youth Peer. Does anybody know? Zaquana, do you remember what exactly it stands for? I can't think of it off the top of my head. It's a
Youth Peer
YPAs.
Credentialing Council.
It's like YPACAC. I will. It was previously called the Youth Peer Services Advisory Committee. So that if you were interested, if or have been a youth peer advocate for a while and you're interested in getting involved, you can use the QR code at the bottom for the interest form and apply for that. Next slide. We have an upcoming code of ethics training for youth peer advocates through CTAC. We were not able to find the Zoom link. I don't believe that was released yet for the registration. But in the chat, Zaquana just put the calendar link so that you could put it on your calendar, and once that becomes available, you can register. And then next slide. The last upcoming event is the 2025 annual conference here at Families Together. So that's going to be May 4th and 5th. There's still time to register. Zaquana just put the link in the chat for the registration. So feel free if you want to come up. It's up in Albany. But if you want to come by, register and join us for that. And then the next slide is link. So Zaquana's going to put the link in the chat. Just let me know, how we did today. Let us know what we can do differently, what, other topics you'd like to see, et cetera, et cetera. So please take that. I would love feedback. I want to know, how I'm doing. I want to know how we can all do better and bring the best for y'all. And then the next slide, I think it's the final slide. Okay, it's a little messed up here, as you can see, but these are the emails. I know that the panelists already kind of put the emails in the chat, but these are the email addresses that each of the panelists have agreed, to provide. If anybody wants to connect, I had envisioned that we would have had time for a Q&A, but all of the panelists had so much amazing stuff to say that we didn't even have time for it. So if you wanted to reach out, just ensure that when you're, asking any kind of questions or such, we're respecting the boundaries and the privacy of the panelists as well, because there can be some sensitive sort of topics. But please, reach out, let people know what questions you have. And thank you so much for joining us and for staying back just a little bit, to get all this info.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Wonderful,
Thank
guys.
you all.
you.
Thank you.
Great.